The gravel road remembered her. Every crunch under Mara's boots was a sound she could map to childhood summers. The soft, slow rhythm of going to fetch water. The clatter sprint of hiding from late storms. The scamper of cousins now scattered across time zones. Tonight the rhythm was hollow. The memorial flowers had already wilted in the cool air, their sweetness thinning into something faint and medicinal, like a hospital memory slipping into a pine-scented night. She had come back because she could not imagine not coming back. That was what people said at funerals, as if grief were a compass you pressed against your chest to see where it would point. But grief wasn't a compass. It was fog. The mountains were ink-black silhouettes against a sky that hadn't quite decided whether to keep the last light. October made slow promises here. Long dusks, patient crows, cold that crept rather than struck. She zipped her jacket up to her throat and told herself she would only walk to the bend, just far enough to see the sawgrass shine its pewter blades in the twilight. A moth tilted toward her like a falling leaf and vanished. The quiet felt lacquered, as if the valley had been sealed for winter, and she'd slipped in after hours. She thought of her grandmother's hands, slim, quick, rolling bread dough without looking, always humming a song that had no words. It rose inside her that remembered not melody. When the tears arrived, they came surprisingly gentle. She didn't sob. She breathed, and her face grew wet, and she kept walking, because what else could she do with her body except move it forward through the night? The sound came softly at first, a rhythmic shuff-shuff that didn't belong to the gravel. She turned. Nothing. The road was a ribbon of dimness between dark banks of blackberry and broom sedge. She sniffed and wiped at her cheek with her sleeve. The sound came again, closer, underscored by the faintest jingle of something metallic. Hoofbeats. She knew it even before the shape emerged. Knew it the way you know rain is about to start when the air turns mineral and electric. The animal was nearly silent, materializing around a bend as if the night had decided to borrow a body. Ears pricked like small sails, a compact, sturdy frame that didn't apologize for itself. A rope halter frayed where it met the cheek, a pair of eyes that were not sweet. No, that was wrong, but clear in a way that refused to flatter. He was not asking for permission to exist. He had simply decided to appear. "Hey," Mara said, feeling suddenly foolish for speaking. "Where did you come from?" From behind, obviously, the way surprises always did. He stopped a few paces off and regarded her. In the old stories her grandmother told, donkeys were stubborn only to the degree that mountains were permanent, a misunderstanding of what duty looked like when it endured. They carried what they could carry. They did not apologize for limits. They were honest. "Lost?" she asked, softer. Something jingled when he tossed his head. A bell she saw now, no larger than a walnut, wired to the headstall near his left ear. Its silver was tarnished, dull, so that it caught the last light like a memory rather than a gleam. He stepped forward and exhaled. Warm breath feathered her wrist. She lifted her fingers, slow as the tide. He took their measure with a whisker brush and then placed his muzzle deliberately against her palm. The weight of it surprised her, the density of trust in that one careful lean. He smelled like dust and rain that hadn't fallen yet. Under her fingertips, an old scar crossed the bridge of his nose like someone had once drawn a rough line to show which way was north. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay," she felt her chest unlock a fraction. Not relief, not yet, but direction perhaps. The sense that the fog might have an edge. A small, ridiculous laugh bubbled up. "You can't just sneak up on people like that," she said. "You scared me." He took a step closer, and she had the strange, bright feeling of being chosen. Not by a person, not by a god, by a problem, by a road whose end no one remembered but that still demanded feet. When she tried to check his halter for an owner's mark, he shifted sideways as if to say, "Later." His ears flicked toward the right, toward the dark shoulder of the road where broom sedge waved like a rough sea. He cocked his head, listening to something she couldn't hear, and then he did a thing that would change everything. He turned and began to walk, not away, but ahead, then paused to look over his shoulder at her. An invitation. "No," she said reflexively. I can't." He waited. Crickets rattled. Somewhere a nightbird insisted on the same two notes, over and over, as if repetition itself were a kind of map. The moth returned and scribbled in the air between them. Mara thought of the house, of the casserole dishes lined up like polite soldiers, of her aunt's whisper. "She left you things, you know." In a box under the quilt chest. Letters, I think. She had opened the chest, but not the box. The tops of envelopes had glowed like horizons she didn't know how to reach. She swallowed. "Just to the bend," she said, negotiating with a creature that could not possibly care what number of steps she took. "I'll go just to the bend." At that, he resumed walking, not hurried, not cautious, simply moving as if night were a substance you could part with your body. She followed. The road narrowed until it wasn't a road anymore. Only 2 faint ruts between tall grass. Blackberry canes looped thorny parentheses toward them. He sidestepped them without hesitation, and she mirrored him, surprised by how quickly her feet matched his choices. When the ruts bent toward the creek, he halted, dropped his head and blew the soft snort of a thing cataloging a place. The creek's voice was a hush, gliding over stones worn round as good words. Moonlight pooled where the water slowed. On the far bank, willows drooped their thin fingers like they admired their own reflections. Mara reached for the halter again, and finally found leather stamped with letters. She angled her phone to catch light. Backstep, it read, all caps, simple. Above it, another tiny stamp, a bell. Backstep, she said aloud. The word sat perfectly in her mouth, a balancing stone. Is that you? He lifted his head as if to say that a name is just a door. It matters more that you know where it leads. Okay, Backstep. What now? He nosed her jacket pocket, found nothing of interest, and turned to face the willow tangle. Then, deliberate as a password, he pushed his shoulder into an interlaced wedge of branches. The willow sighed and opened. A path revealed itself the way secrets always do. Not newly made, but newly trusted. You have got to be kidding me, Mara said, half to the creek, half to the sky. Mostly to the part of herself that still believed in coincidences. They slipped through. The path was narrow and damp, padded with centuries of leaf fall. Once it must have been used daily. You could feel the old insistence in the way the earth held the idea of feet. Now, dew slicked the ferns and spider silk strung between twigs caught the moon like a harp catches fingers. Backstep went first, tail swishing with the unhurried authority of a librarian returning a book to exactly where it belonged. Twice he paused with such sudden finality that Mara stopped too, hearing nothing and everything, the toothy whisper of a mouse in the duff, a distant uncertain yip, the slow settle of trees remembering wind. They climbed until the creek thinned to nothing but the idea of water. A smell like cold metal braided with the resin of pine, and then the path slipped them out onto a terrace of rock that must have been a viewpoint, long before anyone thought to call views a kind of currency. The town was a pocketful of dim embers far below. The dam's flat scar reflected a single skinny moon. Mara shivered, not from cold, not entirely. It was that feeling of standing near a story's hinge without yet knowing the door size. She crouched to scratch the crest of Backstep's neck. Under her fingers, he was warm and alive and astonishingly solid. Why me? She asked. The words leaked out. Why tonight? There was no answer, of course. Only the night opening its long palm. Only Backstep lowering his head until his cheek bumped her shoulder, a gesture so plainly companionable that she had to sit down before her legs thought to tremble. He smelled again of dust, and that not yet rain. When she leaned back against him, he tolerated it for exactly 6 breaths, and then resettled himself so that she was resting against his shoulder instead of pressing his ribs. You're right, she said, a laugh cracking across the dried lake bed of her throat. Boundaries. Something tugged at her memory. The bell, the stamp on the halter, the little mark above his name, her grandmother's voice, woven with flower dust and the clack of knitting needles. If you ever hear the silver bell, little bird, listen with your feet, not your ears. Mara hadn't thought of that in years. It had sounded like nonsense, charming nonsense, but nonsense all the same. She reached up and touched the bell. It was colder than she expected, cold with a purposeful kind of chill. When she steadied it with 2 fingers and flicked it gently, it didn't ring the way bells usually do. The sound was small and precise, as if it had decided to be quiet in order to travel farther. Backstep's ears slanted forward. He didn't move. He didn't breathe, or he breathed so softly that breath was another name for patience. The sound slipped down the slope, slid along the creek's old bones, combed the distance. Somewhere, Mara didn't know where, only that it was above rather than below, something answered. Not a bell, not a voice, a resonance, like a key turning in a lock that had been waiting a long time to feel the hand that matched it. Backstep stamped once, a tidy punctuation. Then he turned his head and bumped her with his nose. Up, the gesture said. Not finished. What are we doing? She whispered, but she was already on her feet. When she bent, impulse, instinct, to check the small pack lashed to his withers, he did not object. The flap was secured with twine and a knot so sensible it had to be the work of someone who thought in weather. Inside, folded flat and neat, lay a scrap of waxed cloth. She unfolded it. A drawing revealed itself in pencil and faint ink. The mountain's shoulder, the creek's kink. A line that braided through both and ended at a symbol she didn't recognize. In the margin, a single initial, E. Her grandmother's first name had been Eleanor. Mara's breath left in a gust. The moonlight made the pencil lines look like veins. How did you... She began, then stopped. The question didn't matter yet. The fact did. Backstep reached around with prehensile lips and nibbled the edge of the cloth as if to say, "Put it away. We'll need it later." She folded the map and tucked it back, fingers shaking. Her phone buzzed weakly in her pocket. The battery icon a thin sliver. A notification banner scrolled past. News of a brush fire on the western ridge. She glanced toward it. A dull orange smudged the horizon, like a thought you tried not to think. "Tomorrow," she told the smudge, and the way the word sounded in the open made it feel almost like a promise. Backstep stepped closer to the path that led on. He paused there, one hoof lifted, and looked back, ears silhouetted, bell quiet, as if to ask whether she would write the next sentence, or go back to the last paragraph and live there forever. Mara thought of the house again. The cold casseroles, the box under the quilt chest that was not going to open itself. She thought of the way the bell's tone had met something in the dark and been met in return. She thought of how grief wasn't a compass. Yes, and yet here was a creature who had found her in the fog and pressed a direction into her palm. "Okay," she said. The word had a shape now. "We go." He set his hoof down, satisfied, and moved into the narrow. She followed, the moth writing afterthoughts in their wake. The terrace shrank behind them, the town's embers blurred. Above, the ridge gathered itself like the back of a sleeping giant getting ready to turn. Half a mile later, wind shifted. The smell of smoke swung over them, not close, not yet, but certain. Backstep snorted and blew, not in fear, but in inventory. And then he did the simplest, strangest thing. He stepped aside, let Mara draw even with his shoulder, and for 10 long strides they walked side by side, matched. Then, as the path curled between two boulders shaped like sleeping dogs, he eased back behind her. The bell stayed silent. The night made room, and grief, fog or not, felt thinner. From behind the donkey came again, steady as a second heartbeat, and Mara understood that sometimes what saves you does not lead or follow. It keeps pace, unseen, until you are ready to know it is there. Dawn came shyly, with colors that didn't trust themselves. The first light crawled up the mountain like a secret, brushing silver against the leaves before daring to touch the road. Mara was still awake when it happened. She had tried to sleep, had even closed her eyes while leaning against Backstep's shoulder. But her thoughts had kept marching like soldiers who'd forgotten the war was over. When she finally stood, her knees complained and the world swayed slightly, half exhaustion, half disbelief. The donkey was still there, standing where the trees made a soft wall behind them, chewing something invisible, patient as time itself. "Morning," she said, her voice dry. He flicked an ear in acknowledgement, which felt like more courtesy than she deserved. The fire she'd seen the night before had left only a faint orange haze in the far sky now. Too distant to be danger, close enough to be a warning. She brushed leaves off her jacket and looked down the trail they'd followed. It was hard to believe how hidden it had been. One step to the left, and you'd never know it existed. Her grandmother's stories had always hinted at secret paths, old roots the government had buried when they built the dam. At the time, Mara had thought they were fairy tales. Now she wasn't so sure. She crouched beside Backstep, tracing her fingers along his neck. "I should go back," she said quietly.
"People will start wondering," he snorted.
It sounded like disagreement. "I know," she sighed, "but I can't explain any of this. You, the bell, the map." At the word map, his ears twitched, and he turned his head to look at her. The expression was so deliberate, so knowing that it made her laugh. "You understood that, didn't you?" Backstep stared. "Fine," she said, taking the hint. "Let's see it again." She untied the flap of the saddlebag. Inside, the waxed cloth waited, still folded into the same careful square. When she lifted it, she noticed something she'd missed before. Faint pencil writing on the underside, faded by time. 3 words, barely legible. "Follow the bell." Her throat tightened. It was her grandmother's handwriting. No doubt about it. The looping F and the slightly crooked W. She'd seen it 1,000 times on grocery lists and recipe cards. "Follow the bell," she whispered. "But where?" The map itself wasn't big, but it had precision, the kind of hand-drawn accuracy of someone who'd walked every path by foot. The trail they'd followed last night appeared as a thin gray line climbing northward. Near the top of the page, it ended at a small sketch of a lake, or maybe a reservoir, with a symbol drawn beside it. The same bell mark that appeared on Backstep's halter. Her pulse quickened. This can't be coincidence. The donkey blew air through his nose and nudged her shoulder, almost impatiently. "You really want to go, huh?" she said. He looked at her unblinking. "Well, congratulations," she muttered. "You just convinced a journalist to chase a mystery she doesn't understand." She packed the map again and adjusted the strap. The morning chill sharpened as they began moving. Birds were only starting to find their songs. Every now and then, Backstep stopped abruptly, sniffing the air, or listening to something Mara couldn't hear. Each time she trusted him. She didn't know why, but it felt wrong not to. After about an hour, the trail began to rise sharply. The path narrowed between 2 moss-covered stones, then opened to a ridge that overlooked the valley. From there, the town was a watercolor smear in the distance, faint and unreal. Mara could almost imagine she'd dreamed the funeral, the casseroles, the condolences that all sounded like weather reports. A cold wind pulled her back. She tightened her scarf and pressed on. That's when she noticed the footprint. Not Backstep's. Those were small, sure-hoofed, round. This one was long, human, pressed deep into the damp soil, and fresh. She crouched beside it, running her fingers around the edge. The print hadn't begun to dry yet. Whoever made it had passed through less than an hour ago. Backstep snorted softly, his muscles tightening. The hair along his spine bristled like static. "Easy," she said, standing up. "Maybe just a hiker." But the mountain wasn't a tourist place anymore. Not since the dam construction had wiped out half the trails and rerouted the rest. No one came here. No one except, apparently, her, the donkey, and whoever had left that print. Mara glanced around, suddenly aware of how quiet everything was. The birds had stopped singing. "Okay," she whispered. "We stay alert." The trail ahead wound through trees that seemed to bend inward as if listening. She felt watched, but not by Backstep. Something heavier. When the breeze shifted again, she caught it. The faint smell of tobacco smoke. Her heartbeat stumbled. Someone was nearby. She gestured for silence, forgetting momentarily that she was talking to an animal. Backstep obeyed anyway, stepping lightly, ears swiveling like radar dishes. They moved carefully around a bend, and froze. Ahead, maybe 50 feet away, was a man. He stood beside a pile of rocks, a cigarette glowing between his fingers. His clothes were outdoor worker gear, muddy boots, high-visibility vest, a blue cap pulled low. He was scanning the trees, not looking for beauty, but for movement. Mara ducked behind a fallen log. Her mind spun. What if he was just a forestry worker? Or, her stomach tightened, what if he wasn't? Her grandmother's letters had mentioned men in vests once, men who didn't want anyone walking old routes. Backstep stayed perfectly still, head low. His tail barely moved. The man took one last drag, flicked the cigarette into the dirt, and walked on. When his footsteps faded, Mara exhaled for the first time in a full minute. She looked at the donkey. "We're not alone," she whispered. Backstep blinked once, slowly, as if confirming that he already knew. They waited another 5 minutes before continuing, moving in near silence. Every sound felt amplified, the rustle of leaves, the clink of Backstep's bell. She almost reached up to silence it, then stopped herself. The words on the map echoed again, "Follow the bell." Maybe silencing it was the last thing she should do. By midday, the path widened into a small clearing. A stream cut across the rock, shallow but clear enough to drink from. Mara filled her flask, splashed water on her face, and leaned back against a trunk. Her legs ached, her mind even more. "What are we doing?" she muttered. "You realize this is insane, right?" Backstep grazed nearby, pretending not to hear. Mara pulled out her phone. Barely any signal. One flickering bar. She tried opening her email, hoping to find some trace of normalcy, but the app just spun uselessly. She gave up and checked the map again. They were about halfway to the marked lake, but something new caught her eye this time. A faint dotted line branching away from the main trail, leading toward what looked like ruins or old structures. It wasn't labeled. The ink was smudged, as if someone had tried to erase it. Backstep's bell jingled softly, a reminder. She folded the map back, made her decision, and turned toward him. Let's see where that line goes. The detour climbed steeply through brush. Thorny vines clawed at her jeans. The higher they went, the older the air smelled, like stone, rust, and something buried. Then the trees opened into another clearing, and Mara stopped dead. In front of her were the remains of 3 stone cottages. Roofs collapsed, walls half swallowed by moss and ivy. A ghost village. She walked forward slowly, heart thudding. The windows were empty sockets, but the bones of the place were still there. A broken bench, a kettle turned to rust, a child's toy buried in the mud. She felt like she had stepped through time. Backstep followed her in, hooves crunching softly on the gravel. "This must have been one of the old settlements," she murmured, "before the dam." Her grandmother had spoken of these places, villages forced to relocate when the valley was flooded decades ago. Families uprooted, histories washed away under engineered water. But no one had ever said anything about this one still existing. She crouched by a half-collapsed wall and brushed away dirt. Underneath, a faint carving emerged, 2 overlapping letters, E+M. "Eleanor," she whispered. Her grandmother's name. "Who's M?" Her phone buzzed suddenly, startling her. She yanked it out. The signal was gone again, but the screen flickered like it was trying to catch something. A notification flashed and vanished before she could read it. Then, just as quickly, the phone died. "Battery empty," she swore under her breath. A loud snap of a twig froze her. Backstep's head shot up, ears rigid. Someone was near. She ducked behind a wall, heart hammering, peeking through a crack. The same man from earlier stepped into the clearing, scanning with cautious eyes. His vest caught a slice of sunlight, reflective, harsh. He looked around, muttering something she couldn't hear, then pulled out his own phone. For a moment, the glow lit his face, young but hard, with a narrow scar across one cheek. He walked closer to the cottages, kicking at debris. When he neared the one Mara hid behind, Backstep made a sound, a low rumble, protective but quiet. The man's head jerked up. "Is someone here?" he called out, voice sharp. "Hey! You're trespassing, you know that?" Mara held her breath. He took another step, squinting into the shadow. Then, from somewhere higher up the slope, a distant echo broke the tension. A bell. A real metallic ting. Faint, but clear. The man turned, distracted. "What the—" Backstep moved. Not charging, just stepping forward enough that his hooves sounded deliberate. The man's flashlight beam darted toward him, blinding for a second. "A donkey?" the man muttered, lowering his guard. "Where'd you come from?" In that split second of confusion, Mara slipped away, crawling low through the brush behind a collapsed wall until she reached a patch of ferns. Her pulse roared in her ears. When she looked back, The man had turned away, still muttering, following the sound of the bell that had somehow come from nowhere. She found Backstep waiting for her minutes later on the edge of the clearing. He'd escaped quietly, no fuss, as if this was routine. "How did you—" she began, then stopped. "You saved me again, didn't you?" He blinked, slow and calm. The bell on his halter didn't move, but Mara could have sworn she heard a faint echo of its tone, carried by the wind. They climbed higher until the ruins disappeared behind trees. Only then did she let herself breathe fully. That night, they camped beneath a leaning pine on a ridge that overlooked a stretch of black water far below, the reservoir. The dam lights shimmered in the distance, artificial and cold. She could almost see the outline of the drowned valley beneath it. She took out the map again. The marked lake wasn't the reservoir. It lay beyond it, tucked in the uncharted folds of the mountains, an area labeled restricted on modern surveys. And beside the lake, the little bell symbol gleamed under the moonlight like an eye that refused to close. Mara's mind spun. Her grandmother had known about all this. The hidden trail, the bell, the buried villages. And somehow, this donkey, Backstep, carried the map that tied it all together. She looked at him, resting nearby, his breathing steady. "You knew her, didn't you?" she whispered. The night wind lifted his mane. The bell chimed once, a sound too soft to be coincidence. "Okay," she said, heart trembling. "Then tomorrow we keep following the bell." Backstep's ears twitched. Below them, the dam's lights blinked like distant warnings. Above, the stars watched silently as the mountain waited to tell its truth. The mountain didn't wake gently this time. By dawn, the air was restless, dry, metallic, and trembling with the echo of something distant. It was the kind of silence that followed a warning. Mara opened her eyes to find Backstep already standing, staring down the slope as if listening to the earth itself. Smoke hung faintly on the horizon again. The fire she'd seen days earlier hadn't died. It had moved. She pushed herself up, the blanket still clinging to her shoulders. "That's closer," Backstep snorted. His ears angled toward the north, the direction the map had marked as their goal, straight into the path of that haze. "Of course," she muttered. Why would anything be easy? She folded the blanket, stuffed it into her pack, and checked her phone. Dead. Again. She didn't even bother trying to power it on this time. The world had shrunk to what her eyes could see, and what the donkey seemed to know. "Okay, Backstep," she said, tightening the straps on her pack. "Lead the way." He started forward, deliberate as always. The trail wound higher through narrow switchbacks cut into the slope. Sometimes it disappeared altogether under ferns or rocks, but Backstep never hesitated. He walked like he was following invisible footprints. The air grew thinner, the light sharper. Below, the reservoir shimmered, a man-made mirror swallowing what used to be her grandmother's home. It looked peaceful from here, but Mara knew better. She could almost feel the weight of history trapped beneath its still surface. Houses, gardens, fences, stories, drowned so someone could build a new road and call it progress. At one sharp bend, she paused to catch her breath. Her palms were scraped, her throat dry. "You're better at this than me," she said. Backstep turned his head slightly, as if amused. His bell chimed once, a small silver note that seemed to answer, "Keep up." They climbed another half-hour before the wind changed direction. It came hot and fast, whipping dust and dry leaves around them. The smell of smoke grew stronger. Mara shaded her eyes and scanned the ridge ahead. That's when she saw movement. A glint of something metallic near the tree line. A lens, a binocular reflection. Someone was up there. She crouched instinctively. Backstep stopped too, his body still but tense. "Someone's watching," she whispered. The glint vanished, swallowed by branches. She waited, heart thudding. Nothing. Just the whisper of leaves. Maybe it had been sunlight catching stone. Or maybe not. Either way, she couldn't shake the feeling of eyes on her back. They moved faster after that. The trail zigzagged upward, each turn narrower than the last. Rocks loosened under her boots, sliding down into nothing. The higher they climbed, the louder the world seemed to breathe, trees creaking, birds scattering, the low hum of wind scraping through canyon walls. Then, all at once, they hit a ridge where the trail simply stopped. Ahead lay a washout, a scar of collapsed rock and mud cutting straight across their path. The ground had sheared away, leaving a 10-foot gap with a steep drop below. Mara cursed under her breath. "You've got to be kidding me." Backstep approached the edge carefully, peering down. The slope beneath was too loose to climb. On the far side, the trail continued, a ghostly promise. "We can't cross that," she said. "Not alive." He backed away, stamping once, ears flicking as he scanned the surrounding cliffs. Then he turned sharply left away from the trail and started pushing through a thicket of young pines. "Hey, wait, Backstep," she hissed. "That's not the way." He didn't slow. She followed, ducking branches, stumbling over roots. The air in here was cooler, thick with sap and the hum of unseen insects. The donkey wove steadily between trees until they reached a narrow ledge that ran parallel to the washout, almost invisible from the main path. Mara stared at it. "You can't be serious." The ledge was barely wide enough for her boots, let alone a donkey's hooves. Below was a vertical drop of at least 40 feet. One slip and they'd be memories, but Backstep didn't hesitate. He tested the first step, shifted his weight, and began edging along the ledge with uncanny precision. Each movement was deliberate. Front hoof, pause, back hoof, breathe. Mara's stomach knotted. "You're insane," she whispered. But she followed. The ledge forced them close to the rock face. Dust trickled down as she brushed the cliff, the smell of sun-warmed stone filling her lungs. She kept one hand against the wall and her other clutching Backstep's halter loosely. Every step felt like a decision between courage and gravity. Halfway across, the wind hit. A gust strong enough to make her knees buckle. She pressed flat against the cliff, gasping. Backstep froze, muscles rigid. The bell didn't ring, not once. When the wind eased, he turned his head slightly toward her, waiting. "I'm okay," she breathed. "Keep going." They made it to the other side, shaking but alive. Mara leaned against the rock, laughing weakly. "You really are some kind of miracle, you know that?" Backstep shook himself, dust flying off his coat. The bell gave a bright little chime, like applause. They rested for a while beneath an outcrop, eating what little food she had, a granola bar and a handful of dried fruit. The sun had turned harsh now, slicing through the haze. Down in the valley, the smoke plume had grown. Not a thin column anymore, but a spreading bruise of orange and gray. Mara studied the map again. They were getting close to the marked lake, maybe another half day if the terrain held. But as she looked closer, she saw something she hadn't before. Faint lines drawn around the lake's edges, not part of the map's original design. Scribbled additions like notes, and beside them, a word written in shaky handwriting, "Whisper." Her pulse quickened. "Whisper?" she murmured. "What does that mean?" Backstep's ears flicked forward, alert again. He stood suddenly staring downhill. Mara followed his gaze. The trees below trembled. Then came the sound, distant, deliberate footsteps. More than one person. Voices, faint but unmistakable. She went this way. "Tracks, see? Hoofprints," her heart lurched. "They're following us." Backstep moved closer to her, pressing his side against her legs as if to steady her. She could feel his heartbeat, slow, powerful. "The calm inside the storm, okay," she whispered. "We need to move, quietly." They slipped back onto the trail, heading upward again. The voices behind them faded but didn't vanish. Whoever those men were, they were methodical. Not hunters, not hikers. Professionals. As they climbed, the trees began to thin. The air cooled. Soon they reached a narrow plateau scattered with wildflowers and stones carved by wind. From here, Mara could see the faint shimmer of water in the distance. The lake. Its surface reflected the sky like molten glass. "We're close," she whispered. But the sight didn't bring relief. The closer they got, the more the air seemed charged, like static before lightning. Backstep slowed, ears swiveling, then stopped entirely. His head lifted, nostrils flaring. "What is it?" she asked. He didn't move. Then she heard it too. A low, rhythmic sound beneath the wind. Not footsteps, Not animals, something mechanical. A drone. Mara ducked instinctively as a dark shape zipped over the ridge ahead, its rotor slicing the air. The sun caught its camera lens as it hovered, scanning. She threw herself behind a boulder, dragging Backstep with her. The drone paused mid-air, hummed, then drifted slowly toward the trail they'd been on minutes ago. It hovered there for a long, chilling moment before turning back down the mountain. Mara's hands shook. They're using drones. Who are these people? Backstep stamped once, as if agreeing that it was time to stop wondering and start surviving. They moved again as soon as the drone disappeared. The trail twisted through a grove of birch trees, their pale trunks gleaming like bones. The wind whispered through their leaves, making a sound eerily close to words. Whisper. The word from the map. Mara shivered. This is it, isn't it? The ground dipped, and suddenly the trees opened to reveal the lake. Not large, but perfectly round, as if the earth itself had inhaled and held its breath. The water was still, almost black, with a faint silver shimmer along the edges, and at its center, half submerged, stood the remnants of an old stone bell tower, the symbol from the map. Mara's heart stopped for a beat. It's real. She stepped to the water's edge. The lake was too deep to wade, but close enough that she could see the tower clearly, moss-draped, cracked, but unmistakably the same bell mark carved into its side. The same one as Backstep's halter. Her fingers trembled. "Grandma, what were you hiding?" She crouched, staring at the reflection. The tower looked taller in the water than it was in reality, an illusion that made her dizzy. Then something strange happened. The bell around Backstep's neck began to hum softly, not ringing, just vibrating as if resonating with something far away. Mara turned. "Do you hear that?" Backstep stood perfectly still, ears forward, the bell trembling without touch. And then, faint but real, a sound drifted from the direction of the tower. A low clang, muffled by water and time. Mara gasped. The bell. The sound came again, echoing across the lake, followed by another. Not metallic this time, but human. A voice. Too faint to make out, but unmistakably calling her name. "Mara." She staggered back. "No, that's not possible." The voice came again, clearer now, carried on the wind. It sounded exactly like her grandmother. Mara followed the bell. Her vision blurred. Every hair on her arms stood up. It couldn't be real. It couldn't. And yet the sound was there, moving through the air like smoke, circling the lake. Backstep brayed once, a deep, uneasy note. His bell stopped vibrating, then went still. The voice faded. Silence swallowed everything again. Mara collapsed to her knees. "What is happening?" she whispered. Her throat felt tight, her eyes burning. "What are you trying to tell me?" Backstep approached, lowering his head until his muzzle brushed her shoulder. She gripped his halter and closed her eyes, breathing until her heartbeat slowed. When she opened them again, she noticed something glinting near the lake's edge, half buried in the mud. She reached for it. A small metal tag, circular, with a hole punched through the top, engraved on one side, E.M., property of Eleanor Mayfield, her grandmother. Mara's hand trembled. She turned it over. On the back, scratched crudely, were 3 words. They took everything. A sound behind her snapped her out of the trance. Voices again, closer now. Men shouting. The crunch of boots on gravel. "Up there! By the water!" Mara shoved the tag into her pocket and looked at Backstep. "Time to go." He didn't wait for further instructions. They darted into the birch grove just as shouts echoed behind them. A bullet of panic surged through her chest. She didn't look back. She couldn't. Branches whipped her arms. Her lungs burned. The bell clinked faintly with every stride. Not loud enough to betray them, but enough to remind her. Follow the bell. When they finally reached higher ground, she turned for one last look. Down below, flashlights cut across the lake's surface, and in that light, just for a second, she saw movement at the tower's top. A flicker, a shadow, or someone standing there, watching. Then it was gone. Mara pressed her hand to her chest, trying to steady her breath. The night wind rose, carrying whispers through the trees. Not voices this time, but the mountain itself, speaking in its old, forgotten language. Beside her, Backstep exhaled hard, as if clearing the air. His bell chimed once, a clear and steady tone that sliced through the noise. She nodded. Yeah, we keep going. Whatever this is, it's not finished. They turned uphill again, swallowed by the dark, the bell's echo fading into the whisper of the trees. The fire came before dawn. At first, Mara thought it was sunrise, the faint blush of orange over the ridge, the thin golden glow licking the tips of trees. But when the wind shifted, carrying with it the acrid sting of smoke, she knew better. The mountains weren't waking. They were burning. Backstep had been restless all night, ears twitching, tail snapping at invisible ghosts. Now he stood rigid, nostrils flaring, eyes fixed southward where the light was wrong, too fierce, too alive. Mara pushed herself upright, coughing as the air thickened. It's spreading fast. Down below, the valley that held the lake was veiled in a strange copper fog. Somewhere in that haze, men with flashlights and radios were still searching for her. She'd heard them hours ago, voices echoing faintly, then fading into static. Whoever they were, they had resources. And now, the fire might be their perfect cover. Backstep pawed the ground, anxious. His bell gave a single sharp ting. I know, Mara said. We have to move. She jammed the metal tag, the one marked EM, back into her jacket pocket, grabbed her pack, and swung it over her shoulder. The donkey was already facing uphill, muscles tensed, waiting. Above them, the sky darkened with smoke. The map had shown one trail north, leading away from the lake, straight through the old forest zone marked restricted. It was their only option. Let's go, she said, voice hoarse. And fast. They climbed through switchbacks swallowed by gray haze. The smoke clawed her lungs. Every breath tasted like iron and ash. Sparks drifted on the wind like malicious fireflies. The forest roared in places unseen, a low animal sound that made the ground tremble. Still, Backstep pressed on, unwavering. Each step he took was precise, steady. The bell on his halter didn't ring anymore. It hummed, a constant vibration, as if resonating with something far ahead. Mara followed, half blind, one hand gripping his tail rope, her body trembling with fatigue and adrenaline. When the trail narrowed to a rocky chute, she spotted movement behind them. 3 figures, faint silhouettes against the wall of smoke. Flashlights flickered in their hands, cutting narrow beams through the haze. They're still coming, she whispered. Backstep stopped. For the first time since she'd met him, he turned to face her directly, eyes dark and certain. His entire body seemed to say, "Trust me now, or we're both done." "Okay," she breathed. "I trust you." He pivoted sharply off the trail and began climbing through the underbrush, straight up the slope, where no path existed. Mara stumbled after him, scraping her hands on roots and rocks. The sound of men's voices rose below. Up there, "She's going off trail! Don't lose them!" The forest exploded with echoes. Footsteps, shouts, the crackle of burning branches. Mara's heart pounded like the fire itself. She ducked under a fallen pine, crawled through a tangle of ferns, and emerged into a clearing ringed with boulders. Backstep stood at its center, head lifted toward the sky. The smoke was thinner here. In the distance, faintly, she could hear the sound of rushing water. "Water," she gasped. "There's a stream." He moved again, guiding her toward it. They broke through another wall of brush and found the creek, a narrow ribbon glinting silver even through the ash. The sound of it was almost musical after so much fire. She fell to her knees, splashing her face, drinking greedily. Backstep did the same, lowering his muzzle to the current. When she looked up, something caught her eye. A wooden post, half buried in the silt beside the creek. Weathered letters carved into its surface spelled a single word: Whisper Station. Her pulse quickened. The map, the word, whisper. The creek curved around a ridge. Following it, they found what remained of a building, a squat stone structure, half collapsed but still standing. Rusted pipes jutted from its walls. On the doorway, faded white paint spelled Hydro Relay 03. Mara stared. A relay station. For the old dam project, she stepped inside cautiously. The air was cool, heavy with dust. Rusted filing cabinets lined one wall. Most of them burst open, papers scattered like bones. A large table sat at the center, its surface covered in mildew-stained maps. On the far wall, a metal cabinet was chained shut, but one hinge had rotted free. She pulled it open. Inside were folders sealed in plastic and a single small tin box. The box was stamped with a familiar symbol, a bell. Her throat closed. "Grandma." She lifted the lid. Inside were old photographs, black and white images of the valley before it was flooded. Families, houses, children. In one photo, a younger version of her grandmother stood beside a man in a surveyor's jacket. Behind them, handwritten words on a wooden sign read, "Mayfield Ridge, to be preserved." The next photo made her gasp. It showed construction machinery tearing through the same ridge, the sign broken on the ground. A group of people protested in front of it, Eleanor among them, holding a small donkey by the reins. Backstep. Mara's eyes filled with tears. "You were hers," she whispered. "All this time." She flipped the photo over. On the back, scrawled in fading ink, "They built over the fault. The water won't hold. If they ever find this, ring the bell." She barely had time to process it before a shout echoed outside. "Here! Tracks!" Mara's head snapped up. The men had caught up, Backstep brayed sharply, a warning. His bell rang for the first time in hours, loud, clear, and pure. The note reverberated off the station's walls, echoing through the canyon like a signal flare. The men shouted in alarm. One fired a flare gun into the air, its red light slicing through smoke. Another's voice carried through the crackling forest. "Grab the girl!"
"The files!"
Mara shoved the photographs and documents into her pack. She turned toward the creek's exit, but flames were climbing the trees there, blocking their retreat. The smoke grew dense, choking. Heat radiated like an open furnace. Backstep reared, braying. His bell rang again, louder, sharper. The sound wasn't random this time, it called. It reverberated against the metal pipes, setting off a deep hum that shook the ground. Something beneath the station groaned, a mechanical resonance that built into a low rumble. Mara realized it wasn't just a bell. It was a trigger. The men outside hesitated as the ground began to tremble. "What the hell?" Mara grabbed Backstep's halter and pulled him toward the far wall. "Come on, we have to get out!" Behind them, a pipe burst, spraying water. The floor tilted as a hidden valve system roared to life for the first time in decades. The bell's sound echoed through every beam and bolt of the building. "Run!" she shouted. They burst through a side door just as the old relay station collapsed inward with a roar. Water exploded from beneath it, flooding the creek bed and sweeping down the slope toward the lake. The men's shouts turned to chaos as the flood surged past them. Mara and Backstep scrambled uphill, drenched and gasping. The world behind them was fire and water colliding, steam rising, trees hissing. When they finally stopped, they were both shaking, covered in soot. Mara collapsed to her knees, coughing violently. Backstep pressed against her side, solid and steady. She laughed through the coughing, wild and breathless. You did it, whatever that was." She looked back. The lake below was changing. The flood had torn through the dam's lower channel. A section of the wall crumbled, water spilling over like silver blood. For the first time in 50 years, the valley was draining. She pulled the metal tag from her pocket, staring at the words again. "They took everything." "No," she whispered, voice trembling. "They tried to hide everything." She turned to Backstep. "We have to show them. The world needs to see this." He flicked his ears toward the east where the smoke had thinned. The bell on his neck was quiet now, but it glowed faintly in the dawn light, silver and serene. Mara dug through her pack, pulling out her camera, a small weatherproof model she used for field work. Miraculously, it still worked. She started recording, panning across the scene. The broken dam, the draining lake, the drowned village emerging beneath the waterline. Roofs, streets, and a half-submerged church bell tower rising again into air. Her voice shook as she spoke to the lens. "This is proof. The valley wasn't just flooded for hydropower, it was buried. There's a fault line here. The government ignored it. My grandmother, Eleanor Mayfield, tried to stop them, and they silenced her." She turned the camera to Backstep. He stood proudly against the gray dawn, ears forward, smoke curling behind him like a halo. "She left me a guide," Mara said softly. "A survivor who remembers." The ground rumbled again, a distant aftershock from the partial collapse. The bell around Backstep's neck began to ring of its own accord, a clear, haunting note that carried far down the valley. Mara aimed the camera toward the sound. "If you can hear this," she said, voice steady now, "the truth is rising." Behind them, fire engines appeared on a far ridge, tiny red dots cutting through the smoke. Sirens wailed faintly, growing louder. For the first time in days, Mara felt the tremor of hope. Backstep nickered and nudged her arm. She turned, meeting his gaze. "We're not done, are we?" The donkey blinked slowly, then stepped forward. His bell rang once more, pure and silver, echoing off the reborn valley. And somewhere far below, the old bell tower answered, its tone rising weak but alive, like history finding its voice. The wildfire's roar began to fade, replaced by the crackle of rain. The first drops fell heavy, hissing on ash. The storm that had been waiting finally broke open, dousing flame and fear alike. Mara lifted her face to the rain, laughing through the tears. She whispered, "You did it, Grandma." We followed the bell. Backstep stood beside her, unmoving, watching as the valley filled with light again. When the rain cleared, helicopters circled overhead, filming the breach. The world would soon see, and as Mara looked down at the emerging ruins, she saw a shimmer at the edge of the lake. Something bright, metallic, half buried in silt. The silver bell. The one from her grandmother's stories, the one that had started everything. She walked toward it, rain soaking her clothes, Backstep following close behind. She picked it up gently, cold and heavy in her hands. Its tone was quiet now, almost asleep, but when she rang it once, it answered with a perfect crystalline note that rolled through the air like forgiveness. Backstep raised his head, ears pricked. The mountains echoed back, and for the first time, Mara didn't feel alone. The morning after the storm smelled like forgiveness. Wet ash, clean pine, and that strange sweetness that comes when fire loses. Mara stood on the ridge where the smoke had been thickest yesterday. Now the air was so clear she could see everything. The cracked wall of the dam, the draining reservoir, and the exposed skeleton of the drowned village below. Backstep grazed quietly beside her, his coat still streaked with soot but his eyes bright. His bell had stopped ringing after the storm, as if its work was finished. Mara had barely slept. Reporters and emergency crews had flooded the valley all night, drawn by the dam breach. Helicopters circled. Drones hovered. For once, the noise wasn't hunters or cover-ups. It was attention. She had filmed everything, the collapse, the rising ruins, the silver bell, and the metal tag marked EM. The footage was uploading now via her portable satellite link. The caption she'd typed was simple. "The valley speaks again." She sank onto a rock, exhaustion catching up. Her hands trembled, but her chest felt light. "We did it," she whispered. "They'll know now." Backstep raised his head, chewing slowly, and let out a soft bray that sounded almost like agreement. Down below, sirens wailed, and camera crews pointed their lenses toward the ruins. The world was watching a story that had been buried for 50 years, and Mara, who had come here for a funeral, had found a resurrection. By afternoon, investigators had reached the broken dam. Mara stayed back on higher ground, watching as they pulled out boxes from the ruins she and Backstep had discovered. One of the officials, a woman in a dark raincoat, called up to her. "Miss Mayfield, we found documents signed by your grandmother. Geological warnings, safety memos, everything suppressed." Mara's throat tightened. "She was right," she said. "All along," the woman nodded grimly. "Your footage will help us expose this. You might want to prepare for attention. I'm ready," Mara said. And for the first time in years, she meant it. That evening, she sat near the creek with her camera. The sun bled out behind the mountains, leaving the sky streaked with violet. She aimed the lens at Backstep, who stood in silhouette against the fading light. "This is my final entry," she said softly. "The truth is out now. The dam's collapse exposed the village, the records, everything. It wasn't an accident, it was a cover-up. My grandmother tried to stop them, and when she couldn't, she left clues only someone who loved her would follow. She turned the camera slightly, capturing the donkey's steady form. And she left him, Backstep, the keeper of the bell. Backstep flicked an ear but didn't move, his shadow tall and unwavering. I don't know if animals remember people, Mara continued, but he remembered her path. He brought me here. He saved my life more than once. Maybe he remembered her promise too, that the mountain keeps its truth, even when the world forgets. The wind picked up. The bell on Backstep's halter gave one faint chime, barely a whisper. Mara smiled. "We're heading home tomorrow," she said. "Wherever home is now." They spent the night by the ruins of Whisper Station. The stars were brilliant above the black silhouettes of burnt pines. Mara dozed lightly, comforted by the rhythm of Backstep's breathing. Sometime around midnight, she woke to a sound. Not fire, not wind. A ringing, soft, distant, and unmistakable. Her heart leapt. The silver bell. She sat up quickly. The sound came from down the slope, near the drained lake. It rang twice, clear, deliberate, and stopped. "Backstep," she whispered. The donkey was already awake, head raised, ears fixed on the same direction. The moon caught the silver of his halter, and for an instant, his bell shimmered faintly in response. Mara stood, shivering in the cool air. "Is someone there?" No answer. Only the lingering echo of that bell, fading into silence. She hesitated, torn between fear and curiosity. Every instinct said stay, but another part, deeper, older, said follow. She sighed. "Of course you want to go, don't you?" Backstep blinked. "Fine," she murmured, grabbing her flashlight. One last mystery. They followed the faint sound down toward the shore, past the cracked remains of the dam, and into the muddy skeleton of what used to be the reservoir. The moonlight painted everything silver. Pools of water, twisted rebar, broken rooftops jutting out of the silt. The bell rang once more. This time it came from near the old church tower. When they reached it, Mara froze. The tower's door, once sealed underwater, stood open. The smell of damp stone and iron filled the air. Backstep snorted, uneasy. Inside, the air was cooler, thick with mist. She shone her flashlight up the spiral steps, catching faded carvings on the walls. Bells, initials, handprints. At the very top, the light found it. A small silver bell, hanging from a rusted beam, swaying gently, though there was no wind. Her breath caught. "You're still here," she stepped closer. The bell was identical to the one she'd found yesterday. Same markings, same tone. When she reached for it, her fingers brushed cold metal. And something else, another tag. It dangled from the bell's rope, newer, shinier than the rest. She lifted it into the light. It wasn't engraved with EM. It read, "For MM, the truth never stays buried." Her initials. Mara froze. "Who?" A sound outside cut her short, hoofbeats on wet stone. Slow, rhythmic. She turned to look. Backstep was still at the tower entrance, but his ears were pinned, eyes wide. The hoofbeats didn't come from him. They came from behind the tower. The bell above her head swayed again, ringing once, soft, mournful. Mara's heart hammered. She stepped outside into the moonlight, sweeping her flashlight toward the sound. The beam caught a figure at the edge of the ruins, a man in a dark coat, standing beside another donkey. This one was smaller, younger, its coat darker than Backstep's. The man raised a hand, the silver glint of a camera lens catching the light. "Miss Mayfield," he called, voice calm and echoing across the empty basin. "You've done good work. The world's watching. But there's more buried here than you think." Mara gripped her flashlight tighter. "Who are you?" He smiled faintly. "A journalist like you. Someone who followed the same trail a long time ago." She frowned. "Then why didn't I find you before?" He shrugged. "Maybe you weren't meant to, until now." The younger donkey shifted beside him, its bell chiming a perfect echo of Backstep's. The sound carried through the hollow valley, two notes blending like a chord that shouldn't exist but did. When Mara looked back toward Backstep, he was still staring, motionless, ears forward, listening. The stranger lowered his camera. "There's another bell," he said. "Deeper still. When the water's gone, you'll hear it." And then, before she could speak, he turned, leading the dark donkey back into the mist that still hung above the ruins. The echoes of hooves faded slowly until only the night remained. Mara stood frozen, breath shallow. Backstep stepped forward, stopping beside her, his bell giving one soft, uncertain ring. She whispered, "Another bell. Deeper still." The words lingered in the air like prophecy. Far beneath the drained lake, where the mud cracked inside, something metallic answered. A faint, echoing chime rising from the depths. Backstep lifted his head sharply, ears pricked. Mara's flashlight flickered. She swallowed hard. Guess we're not done after all. And then, from behind her, came one final sound. A single, deliberate hoofstep in the gravel,